100 years ago, Boston found itself at the center of a revolution whose intensity grew for decades to come. At the heart of it was Boston journalist Monroe Trotter, renowned filmmaker D.W. Griffith, and his landmark film, The Birth of a Nation. Griffith's 1915 film chronicled the Civil War and Reconstruction in the South, but it included white actors in blackface, portrayals of Klansmen as heroes, and freed slaves portrayed as vengeful criminals. The film sparked violent protests across the country, and in Boston, Monroe Trotter tried to ban it altogether. This battle is the subject of a new book, The Birth of a Nation: How a Legendary Filmmaker and a Crusading Editor Reignited America's Civil War. Author Dick Lair is a veteran journalist who worked at the Boston Globe for almost 20 years and has authored several other books, one with me. Dick, welcome.
Good to be with you, Mitch.
Thanks. Most viewers, I think, know you as the author, co-author of Black Mass, the story of Whitey Bulger and the corrupt FBI. A story of 100 years ago, a journalist and a filmmaker might seem to them to be a departure.
Yeah, well, it is a bit in the sense of doing a narrative history rather than working with more current events. But for me, from my perspective, thematically, there's a lot of connection. There's a river of sorts running through it, and that's this interest in justice, injustice, civil rights, the abuse of power, things like that are resonating through both stories.
Okay. I know personally this is a story that you've been carrying with you in many ways for much of your career, going back to your early days as a reporter.
Well, the impact of The Birth of a Nation, I think, is what you're referring to, Griffith's blockbuster film. I think anyone in our lifetime who is familiar with it, it's because they took a film history course in college, and it's the anchor, it's the starting point. Griffith is the pioneering American filmmaker. As a young journalist in the late 70s, I had a second viewing that left an indelible mark, and that was when the Klan was recruiting in, of all states, Connecticut, where I was working as a reporter. And David Duke from Metairie, Louisiana, came up, did a whole bunch of press conferences, then met with his local unit in a secret meeting at which he pulled out this movie. This was his teaching tool, his propaganda piece, and that had, like, then I came to fully understand. You know, not so, you know, it was in school that I appreciated its technical artistry. It was at this Klan meeting where I really, it hit me hard and stayed with me that it's, you know, racist propaganda.
We have a clip, in fact, that illustrates just how disturbing and racist this movie is. The scene we're about to show is a mob of Klansmen who blame a man, played by an actor in blackface, for the suicide of a Southern damsel. And the Klan is supposedly putting this man on trial.
Yeah.
Let's take a look.
Rough justice.
Yeah. Now, I know that's a disturbing...
Oh yeah, and at that meeting I referred to, that it was at this point that David Duke, who's a nationally known figure, he was applauding, clapping, and those few Klansmen in the room did likewise. I mean, and that's it in a nutshell. You can see why Black America in 1915, Monroe Trotter of Boston being at the forefront, was so offended by this movie.
Now, I know you as, obviously, as a professor of journalism at Boston University, a champion of free speech, and yet, having read the book, the hero of the story is Monroe Trotter, someone who's trying to censor speech in a way. Was that an awkward situation?
Oh yeah, you know, we're both journalists, we're both First Amendment guys, and he himself was a crusading newspaper editor. What is he doing? Trying to shut down free speech and expression. That was a perplexing issue for me going into the research, and it's part of the, if I do my job right in the book, is to bring the reader back in time, to a time when the First Amendment was not nearly as robust as we take it for granted today. Censorship was more widely spread, and in fact, this new thing called a feature film, I mean, this is really the birth of film. It's a media revolution. No one knew really what to make of it, and in early 1915, the Supreme Court had to deal with a case on whether First Amendment extended to cover film, and it ruled no. It ruled that this is a business, pure and simple, subject to regulation just like any other business. So there's a whole different mindset that made it easier for someone like Trotter to use that tool in his toolbox. But I was also happy to discover that he wasn't necessarily all that comfortable doing it. And he and W.E.B. Du Bois, who was also a prominent figure in the story, would have preferred to fight speech with speech, make their own film that answered the racist portrayal of Black America. They didn't have the funding, which is probably not surprising.
Is that the answer today? That you know, we can admire this film perhaps for its technical greatness or appreciate it as a historical artifact of film. But is the answer now just to answer this kind of hateful speech with speech?
I think so, or at least in one of my goals of this book is that, you know, the centennial of the movie is next year, and there'll be retrospectives and whatnot. I hope this narrative history, you know, it helps that discussion and examination of the movie as it puts it in a larger social civil rights context. But yeah, that would be my perspective, is that you answer speech with speech. And this is a drama that, you know, is charged with issues that we still struggle with and talk about today. Trotter, they didn't have this term back then. It wasn't coined yet. But he was arguing that this was hate speech. That was the, you know, no matter where you come out on this, and we all come out in different places, but he was arguing as in more modern language that this is hate speech that's so offensive and beyond the pale that it needs to be restricted.
And in a way, Trotter got the last laugh to some extent, because Griffith, late in life, had an epiphany that this was, in fact, a form of hate speech and should not be shown.
Yeah, in my research, in the Griffith papers, there was some material from a would-be biographer that, you know, that never got written, and there was this great interview in which Griffith, in his later life, expressed remorse and regret, and he felt that perhaps this movie should not be shown to young people. I guess, again, in modern time, it would be PG-13.
Yeah. Well, Dick Lair, thank you very much for joining us, and it's a wonderful book.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch.